Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Consciousness and Healing Initiative monthly webinar. I'm your host, Dr. Shamini Jan, on behalf of Chi. I see folks rolling in here to our Zoom platform. And for those of you watching on Facebook, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so thrilled to introduce our guest, which I will do in just a moment as everyone rolls in, but please feel free to hang out in the chat and let us know where you're coming from. We appreciate you so much. We appreciate you joining us from all over the world. I know that so many of you come from Europe, from the US, East Coast, West Coast. We're so grateful to have the time with you today. And let us know where you're coming from. We're really excited to see you and have you with us. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom for the first time, Kansas City, I see. All right. San Diego, Canada, Washington. Wow. Welcome, everybody. Welcome so much. For those of you who are new to us, we will have time toward the end of our hour to have Gail answer your questions. And the best way to do that is to type in at the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen here on Zoom. So you'll just type Q&A and you'll type in your questions there. If you type it in the chat, sometimes it gets lost. So just type them into the Q&A. Hello from South Carolina. Well, hello, I'm in South Carolina too. Great. Tokyo, thank you so much. Wow, Utrecht, wonderful. Green Bay, Wisconsin. Lovely, lovely. Thank you all for joining us. Fort Collins, thank you so much. So I am so thrilled to introduce our guest for our webinar today on the Chi webinar. Her name, if those of you who have not met her before, is Dr. Gail Jett. And you might know Gail from her work in Eden Energy Medicine, where she's an advanced practitioner. She also received her doctorate of theology in pastoral integrative health from Holos University, and in both received her ordination, of course, in 2018. She has also been working for over 40 years as an RN, a family nurse practitioner, and a women's health nurse practitioner, and she's a board-certified advanced holistic nurse. Gail knows and believes that it's imperative to really share the scientific basis for the energy healing modalities, and she loves to weave her research findings as well as her practical experience for those who can utilize the power of energy medicine and energy healing. Gail, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Shamini. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. I also love that you're a motorcyclist, if I understand correctly. That's awesome. That's one way to get grounded, I will say that.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
That's wonderful. And you're hailing to us from Oregon, as I understand.
Correct. Yes.
Up with the trees. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. And well, you have obviously been working tirelessly as an RN and discovered the power of energy healing for patients. And I know that you share a lot of passion for integrating these therapies into healthcare. So for most of us, I think, that are in the healing arts, passionate about these areas, they often come to us from our own experience. And I'm just curious, what led you on this path to, you've obviously been, I'm assuming that you've been practicing nursing for many years and then maybe just became acquainted in some way with these biofield therapies, as we sometimes like to call them at Chi. Some people call it energy medicine, subtle energy medicine, so many names.
Right.
But did you have some kind of personal experience that opened you up to the biofield?
Yes, I did. I would say my first experience was to take a Reiki. It was a group class on Reiki in San Diego. I was born and raised in Santa Barbara, California, and grew up in San Diego, North County, and went to a large class on Reiki. And I was totally blown away by what happened to my hands. The people would talk to me and say, well, when you put your hands on me, they get so warm. And I'm like, well, they feel normal to me. But I couldn't wait to get home and try it on people. And I got results. And I was like, well, this is very cool. I wish I knew more about it. And I'm going to say that's probably 30 some odd years ago. And I went on to get additional training in Reiki, both Karuna and Usui Karuna and Sikkim Sikkim, and love using it. But I think the pivotal point was in 2007. Many people have heard this story, but for those who haven't, I was shredding junk mail one day, and it was kind of a cold, gloomy, overcast day, and a little postcard came through, and it said, "Do you want to increase your energy?" And I thought, yeah, who wouldn't on a day like this? And I started to stick it in the shredder, and it was like this hand took my wrist and said, "No, you need to look at this." So I looked at it, and it was a seminar in Seattle, which is about 6 hours from where I live now, to see some people that I had not heard of before. But what drew my attention was I could get nursing credits for my license. And I thought, well, you know what? I could do this. It's just up the road for the weekend. So I went up, and I was so completely blown away by the experience. The people were Donna Eden and her husband, David Feinstein. And Donna did the first part of the seminar, and we experienced things that I was like, I need to know more about this. This is amazing. And what, of course, being pretty left brain at that point, but there's nothing wrong with that. I also, as a nurse, had a lot of questions. And when I watched David's presentation on the effects of emotional freedom tapping on people with PTSD, and what solidified it for me was the PET scans that he had in his presentation, showing the difference between tapping for anxiety and how much of the brain lit up versus using benzodiazepines, things like, Ativan and that kind of thing, that can have problems, as we know, for any kind of long-term use. So I've talked to the people at the seminar. They said she's got a program. I jumped in, got one of the last slots in the intensive that they were doing at the time before the program. And the rest is history, because I knew my life was going to change in a very positive way. And I came back from the different trainings, and I would take it into my office, and I would use it with my patients, and they were amazed. And I just knew that I wanted to understand more what was going on. So that has led me, I've been a lifelong student. I always have a lot of questions. And I also know that in conventional healthcare, we're very, it's important to have good evidence-based medical practice, because, we are about definitely using the science. So that just kind of led me on the path of exploration as to what I was experiencing and what it actually meant, and then connecting dots. And so I've been doing that ever since.
Wow, amazing. Well, I so resonate with your story. I think so many of us do. As a scientist, I was drawn to the biofield too from my own experience, as many of us are. And
Yes.
like you, I think being very left brain and kind of wondering, wow, this feels really powerful. And I wonder if it could really help patients on a larger level, because I just noticed what happened to me. And for me, it was, is anybody studying this? Like, what's going on? How do we understand this from a scientific point of view? Because Gail, I appreciate what you're saying, because our wisdom and our understanding is built on both empirical data, right? And like understanding what works and for whom and under what circumstances, but also informed by our personal experience, right? I mean, honestly, as scientists too, we know, like, anyone who says that their hypotheses or even what they study aren't guided by experiences, come on.
Right.
We have all kinds of jokes about people who go in to study psychology, believe me.
Exactly. Right.
So this is fascinating. So this really set you on a path, and you were practicing medicine at this time, right? So
right.
How did you did it feel to you like you were in these separate worlds of, like, here's the energy healing work and then here's my nursing work? At what point did you see those kind of coming together for you personally?
I will say, I'll share with you one other, so I will flesh that out for you. One thing that happened early in my nurse practitioner career was I was getting my training in that, and I was working labor and delivery nights in the hospital near the school where I was going. And those of us, any other nurses know about, working night shift and PMs, but pretty much everybody's 12-hour shifts now, but we used to have like 3. And so I was going to school during the day and working at night, and like a lot of us, getting by with not much sleep. One night we had a quiet night in the labor and delivery ward, and I got floated down to ICU. So down to the intensive care unit, where I was like a total fish out of water. Like, ooh, okay. And the woman that I was assigned to, one of the patients, she actually coded, had a heart attack. So the whole team came in and worked on her and brought her back. And it was pretty close to when I'd come on to shift, so around midnight when that happened. And I remember it was late in the morning where I was going to be going off shift pretty soon. And I went in to talk to her, and she's very quiet. And I said, how are you doing? She said, well, can I ask you something? I said, sure. She said, when you were all in here working on me, she said, I was floating up in the corner, and I was watching all of you work on me. And she said, it was the most painful thing to have to go back into my body. She said, because I'm up here and it's this beautiful light and I'm watching you, and I'm like, ugh. And she said, why did you do that? I said, well, because that's what we're trained to do. I was 25, I think, at the time. And I said, I don't really have a good answer for you, except it's the truth. We're trained to save lives. That's what we do. But that stuck with me. And it stuck with me because this was way before we knew about near-death experiences and things like that. But you know how things in life happen to you, as we know, these different doors, some will open kind of quietly for you, and you'll go, okay, that's in the background, and that's something to think about for future. So moving several years ahead, I took my training and finished it in 2010 with Donna's program. I went on to take all of the classes that they offer, the advanced classes and all of that, and was invited to be faculty, which was an honor and very exciting. And I was working in a large OBGYN clinic at the time, and they were awesome. They totally supported what I was doing and even allowed me to, I would see my first patient in the morning would be an energy session, and my last patient of the day. And then in the middle of that, I would do the conventional stuff.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Right.
You're like bookending energy healing among conventional patients.
Yeah. It was a little, okay, well, who am I now? All right, okay, we're doing this. But the other thing that was very cool about it was that I was able to use some pain techniques, because I won't freak people out, but in the world of OBGYN, there are some techniques that can be done in the office that are painful, okay? And so they would bring me in to do the pain. It could be things, it was, mostly hands-on acupressure type stuff, but sometimes it was actually working above the body in the field. And we got results, and we didn't have to use as much medication.
So I want to just make sure I understand this. So you're working in a conventional setting, and you were actually asked, your colleagues, I guess, were clued into the fact that you were learning these practices. And so they're basically asking you to come in and practice to reduce the pain and reduce medication use in these patients.
Correct. They did. Yeah. In fact, I think, was it 3 out of the 5? No, 3 out of the 4. We had 4 at that time. 3 out of the 4 had actually even come to me for energy work.
Oh,
so
great.
they'd experienced
it. Or these
yes.
doctors and other fabulous.
They're MDs. They were all MDs. Yes. Yeah. So
that's wonderful.
Right.
We're open to it and actually wanted to receive sessions. And
yes,
I wonder if any of them went on to get training in practices.
Well, one of them was an osteopath, and so he was probably the most open. The other two, one of them, her dad was an acupuncturist, and then the other one was your typical, allopathic. All he knew was he'd had an accident, and I used some pain techniques on him, and they helped. So, he knew from personal experience that it worked. And what I also did, just because to cover the bases, I went on and got my massage therapy license, because massage therapy covers, here in Oregon, it covers things like acupressure. And so we actually built insurance and got paid for this too. So it was, it was a total win-win all the way around.
That's beautiful. And what
Yes.
a wonderful story. I have talked to many different colleagues over the years who are integrating these things or attempting to integrate these things into clinics and hospitals. Some of them receive pushback. Some of them, I've had, for example, colleagues of mine, energy healers. So I trained with Reverend Rosalind Bruyere.
Yes.
And so some of my colleagues who have trained with Rosalind and other practices as well have gone on to set up clinics, for example, for veterans in different places in the country. And one of them wrote me and said, "Quick, can you please send me whatever you think is the best evidence behind biofield therapies?" And I said, "Well, sure, I'm happy to. Why are you asking? I'm just curious." And he said, "Because we have an opportunity to scale up this volunteer program that we're having and actually get some funding for it to make it more robust. But they want to know whether there's any data." So I love what you're sharing, Gail, because on one hand, we know that one way that we integrate these into the healthcare system is through the experience that doctors might have. But then on the administrative level, people need evidence, right? They need evidence. They can't move forward with something unless they know something about benefits to harm ratio.
Right.
Is it going to help the patient? Is it going to hurt them? Right. Is there any evidence to support it? So I know that you're really passionate about that as well. So you had this experience in your clinic, and it sounds like you started integrating more and more of the practices that you learned from Donna and David. You started teaching them, you started integrating them, but then it sounds like you also saw this wider picture of what could happen, right? Beyond just your practice.
Yeah, I did. And during that time, I actually opened an office as I was working full time for them, but I was like, I want to do this more. And so I opened, I had a 1 day a week. I think I worked Saturday, and had a very small energy medicine practice and was, seeing clients there. And that began to grow and get bigger. And as things happen in life, as we know, that particular practice I was working for ended up dissolving in 2013. And so I was working part-time for a family medicine physician, and she was very open to me integrating that, which I did. It was just sometimes the logistics of trying to do that were a little bit more challenging. But again, I had opportunities to show people simple, quick little things. Like there was a lady whose blood pressure was really high. And so I did some particular techniques on that and showed her. We did some acupressure points, and I traced a meridian line backwards because you take energy out of it when you do that. And her blood pressure came down. And she's like, "Oh, so these are simple little self-help tools that people can do to help to lower their blood pressure. And it's not a one size fits all. That's one thing I like to tell people too, because what I mean by that is in her particular situation, I played with a couple of different things in that there's a point right here on the wrist, for example. It's in line with the baby finger, just below the crease in the wrist. Mm-hmm. And this is called Heart 7. And I love the Chinese medicine names for these points. This is called the Spirit Gate. Oh. And this point has many purposes, but one of the things it can do is it can help occasionally with arrhythmias. It can help with, it's good for the physical heart. It can help to energize the physical heart. And it is good for insomnia. And we know that insomnia, and there's a lot of that these days, okay? But we know that insomnia can be a contributor to heart disease.
Yeah.
Right.
Makes sense. So I don't know if anyone has studied this particularly, but first of all, quick question. So sure. Am I touching here on like the kind of vein part, right? So we want to touch here, and you're saying, to help us sleep or deal with insomnia. So my scientific mind says, okay, well, this is obviously affecting the autonomic nervous system and somehow enhancing parasympathetic.
Correct.
A greater parasympathetic dominance, right? More activity in that parasympathetic rest and digest.
Yes.
aspects. So have we studied? Of course, I'm the nerd that has to ask in the room.
No, I know. No, you and I are two peas in a pod. Yes, I don't know. I don't know specifically, because there could be research, as you and I know. There's a lot out there, and there could very well be, because we're learning so much about the role of the vagus nerve, and I'm starting to incorporate more of that kind of thing some in my practice here as well, because it plays such a huge role in everything.
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, I have a nice little section that actually seems to be some of the Sounds True editors' favorite section on the role of the vagus in healing. It's anyway, we could dive into that, Gail, forever, but
Right.
practices, I'm just curious, so obviously you can dive right into a practice pretty quickly with the Eden method. And
Yes.
I'm wondering if we could digress for a moment.
Sure.
Speaking of practices, are there ones that you would suggest for us, kind of navigating the times that we're in right now? There's a lot of emotional upset. Talk about autonomic nervous system imbalance. Right?
Well,
the forces at work are kind of putting us into sympathetic overdrive. So a lot of people are probably having trouble sleeping, for example, and there's a lot of anxiety in the air. And sometimes we just want to kind of come back to center.
Sure.
So are there practices that you recommend or that you notice that you're using a lot these days with people?
Yeah. Yes. One of the things that Donna teaches us also, and it's very true, is if you're seeing a pattern with your clients of certain things being, out of balance, to check yourself. And I was like, yeah, okay. So I'll back up and I want to talk about what happens. And people really, this is important for people to understand. The stress response, when it is triggered, and this can be triggered partly by the vagus and partly by a very intelligent energy system called the triple warmer. Chinese medicine for it is Sanjiao. You probably heard of that. And it is basically in charge of our defense. Its job is to defend us. And as we learn about triple warmer, he's triple warmer, triple burner, triple heater, and kind of that could be a whole class. But suffice it to say that when it is triggered, because it is a subtle intelligence, when it is triggered, up to 80% of the blood leaves the forebrain. And they've studied this. I wish I could find the online one that I'd seen that shows you can see the blood vessels just going,
wow,
as the blood drains out and goes into the body for the fight or flight response, right? And so we know that the kidneys get extra, the heart, the lungs, the muscles, so you can take off and run or fight.
Of course, this is the frontal lobe that garners executive function, kind of higher level thinking, that kind of thing, right? So the blood is gone from that area in times of stress.
Right. And I tell people it's kind of like Elvis, it's left the building, for those of us old enough to remember. But anyway, there's a couple of other things that happen. And you have an increase in adrenaline on purpose, or epinephrine, to help you run or fight, whatever you're going to do. And then you have an increase in cortisol. And cortisol is both of these are only considered for short term. And cortisol is there to give you a burst of energy, to help to block pain. And yet when you have this constant, because these were designed for you to either go fight the saber-toothed tiger or the marauding tribe or whatever it was, and then you would hopefully go back into the more rest and digest parasympathetic mode, because triple warmer does also work in conjunction with the vagus. And here's 3 important things for people to know, because again, as a healthcare provider, I always would have questions in my mind, like, I wonder if. So let's take, for example, the large number of gastrointestinal issues these days. Okay. Mm-hmm. We have things like SIBO, we have irritable bowel, we have all of those. But here's an energy perspective to think about. And this is kind of where I think that we can really offer conventional medicine another perspective. Yes. From the energy perspective, blood is preferentially shunted from the gastrointestinal system because you don't need to be digesting your food if you're going to be running from the saber-toothed tiger. That's system number one. System number two, the immune system goes offline. And they've documented this with saliva samples of the different antibodies and this kind of thing that'll be depressed for up to sometimes 6 hours after a particular event. And then the third system, because you don't need to worry about fighting an infection. If the saber-toothed tiger gets you, it's going to be his problem. Okay. The third system that goes offline, and the bulk of my nurse practitioner career was spent working in women's health. The third system that goes offline is the reproductive system. Okay? Because it's not considered essential to what's at hand. Now, again, if you had just a short episode of something scary, you would run or fight, you would use up those hormones, blood would come back where it was supposed to go, and we'd go on our way, spending hopefully a good portion of our day in parasympathetic mode, rest or digest. There's so many good reasons to be in parasympathetic. And we are the opposite these days because, we're being inundated with information and it's sensory overload. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I tell people, what I've started to do for myself is just start to limit what you're watching and what you're reading, because your thoughts are so powerful. So a very easy technique that people can do, and it works. And in fact, I would invite our audience to think of something scary right now. I'm sure we'll all come up with something with no problem. Okay. Think of something that's really scary for you right now. When you think about it, you're like, oh, okay. And you're going to put one hand, doesn't matter which one, you're going to put one hand on your forehead. You're going to put your other hand on the back of the head where your eyes and eyebrows would be on the back of your head. And you're just going to close your eyes, and we're just going to kind of breathe into this for a minute or two, because I want you to pay attention to the number you give the scary issue, because we're going to check back in just a bit. And keeping your eyes closed, I would just sort of check in and see what number you would give that. I meant to say it's on a stress level of 1 to 10, but so see what number you would give that now. And when you're ready, you can go ahead and put your hands down and just kind of tune back in and see how you feel.
Feel free to throw in the chat your experiences, y'all. All of you who just did this with us, I would love to hear. Yeah, Gail, for me, it was really interesting because I became more aware of my heart, actually.
Right.
During that practice. Yeah. Okay, we're getting a wow. And, my scary thought went from an 8 to a 2.
Right.
Right. And y'all, there are no right or wrong answers. So we are just curious for your experience. And for those of you who said, I didn't notice anything or whatever, totally valid. We're very, very curious. Okay, Jason says, I nearly forgot what my scary thought was. So I
Right.
had that experience too. I was like, what was I worried about?
Okay, let's talk about what happened there.
Okay, yeah, please.
And for those who didn't, and I know there will be some because I see it in my practice, who say, well, that one usually means you need to hold it longer, because we recommend that hold for about 2 to 3 minutes. But here's what's happening. So remember, we talked about the blood leaving the forebrain, where we access all our tools and our smarts and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is there are some points on the forehead. Now, Donna calls these the main neurovascular points, and what they are reflex points. And this comes out of Touch for Health and Chinese medicine as well. But the important thing to understand about this is that your hand is a magnet. This is the South Pole, and this is the North. And I want everybody to think about what is an important metal that is circulating in blood. That would be iron. Okay. When you put this, and if a person is properly oriented on the earth, your feet will be the South Pole attaching to the North Pole of the earth, and this will be North Pole. So you're putting south to north. And anybody who's worked with magnets, that opposites attract. Boy, they'll pop right together, north and south. But if you put two souths together or two norths, they'll repel each other. Mm-hmm. Okay. So by putting your hand up here, it works in an electromagnetic fashion to help to bring the blood back up into the forebrain and also into the limbic system, seat of emotions. And what we've found is very hard to be in that state of overwhelm, for whatever the stressor is, when the blood has come back up here. Because when the blood returns, it's bringing oxygen, and it's also helping to remove waste products. Mm-hmm. And I have a hypothesis. This is one piece of it. Let's look at Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. We have an explosion of that. But if a person, and I talk to clients about this, they'll say, well, I've got a spouse or a kid or whatever, and they have the news on 24/7. Guess what? Yeah. They're being triggered, and often they're not even aware of it. Right. So the more often we can do this, and I want to tell you that the 2 points on the back of your head, your eyebrows, are what we call the fire points, because there are the 5 rhythms in Chinese medicine, the fire rhythm points. And then right below that, the eyes are the water rhythm points. And that could be a whole class, but suffice it to say that with the 5 rhythms, each of them will have an emotion. I'll take a minute and explain it, because I think this is important.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. And Donna is, the way they teach this is amazing. We have the water element or rhythm, and that has the bladder meridian in it and the kidney. And just suffice it to say that's a yin-yang balance, okay, masculine, feminine. Mm-hmm. And when the water element is balanced, it's about hope. When the water element is out of balance, and this is very general, okay, when it's out of balance, it's fear, okay. Mm-hmm. We call that the creation cycle. So we start with water, which is the same as winter. And then that moves into spring, which is the wood element. And that involves gallbladder and liver. So yin, liver, and gallbladder is yang. When gallbladder is balanced, when the wood element is balanced, it is about being assertive and, claiming, standing in your place in the world and that kind of thing. When it's out of balance, this can lead to aggression, anger, resentment, guilt. Okay, a lot of that out there too. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so wood is the same as spring. Then we move into the fire element, which is summertime, and that actually that rhythm has, and I use the word element and rhythm interchangeably because Chinese medicine teaches it more like elements, but Donna said it is a rhythm that she sees all 5 of these sort of working in concert in the body and in the organs and all of that. And she says it's much more
Mm.
Okay, so the fire element is small intestine and heart is a yin-yang pair. Heart is yin. And the triple warmer and the pericardium, we call it circulation sex. Chinese medicine refers to its pericardium. It's the same thing, but it is it's the partner to triple warmer. Okay. And it's known as the heart's defender in Chinese medicine as well. Okay. When the fire element is balanced, it's about joy. And when it's out of balance, it's panic. Panic, anxiety, right? They kind of ride together on the same horse. Okay.
So, Gail, are you saying we can transform our panic to joy? Yes, I love it. Okay, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. We've got another rhythm, I think, to go through.
Because this is where it's about intention. Also, there's so much really interesting work out there about the power of intention, for heaven's sakes. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And paying attention to where your thoughts are. And what I tell people is, and I have it happen too. The rabbit holes are everywhere. When I'm like, oh, you're in a rabbit hole. Okay, let's change that channel. What would you like to see happen? And your thoughts have an amazing role on your body and your physiology. And that's an important thing for people to understand. We move then into the earth rhythm, earth element, and that is spleen, the spleen meridian, and stomach. So yin and yang. And the earth element refers to the times of the solstice and the equinox. So it's all the betweens. Okay. Mm-hmm. When earth is balanced, it's about compassion. When earth is out of balance, it's worry. We're seeing that. Okay. So, and the spleen meridian, very important to know, plays a huge role along with vagus and triple warmer. They all work together on the immune system. Okay. And so finally, we go into the metal element, which is the same as autumn. That is large intestine and lung. And the large intestine, when its whole thing is letting go, literally, but figuratively, what are we hanging on to in terms of a belief that we need to let go of that doesn't serve us anymore? Mm-hmm. That's one way. And then lung is about grief. Mm-hmm. Now, so when the metal element is out of balance, we can see more in the way of grief and that kind of thing. But when it's in balance, it's about reverence. Mm. Okay. And so we have points on the head for each of those.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Wow. So I've got a reverence point. I've got a joy point.
Right.
I've got a groundedness type of point, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. This is beautiful.
Yeah.
So given that you mentioned, we feel most of us feel out of balance or are recognizing the forces that could bring us out of balance at this time. You mentioned this practice as a way of us addressing, when a fear comes up, that we hold this for some time. And you just explained that there are some points here, including the fire element, if I'm remembering correctly, that
fire and water on the back of the
water
head
as well, right? So we're balancing those elements.
Yeah.
And you've very wisely mentioned that, pay attention to the inputs and what they're actually driving you, to feel and be and do. That's important. That's number one, right? And then when we have these fears and anxieties, we can do this. Is there anything else that you recommend we do from, your practices, the work that you're doing at this time? Any other kinds of practices that you'd recommend for emotional wellness, for example?
Yeah, let's go over those five because they're critical and they're all being triggered right now. Okay, so we know that water and fire, the back of the head, the eyebrows are fire, and water is the eyes. And then you're going to move up to the top of the head, and that is the metal element. Okay, so if you're having grief, okay, or sadness or loss, all of that, you're always going to want to hold the main neurovasculars, which, by the way, work by themselves. Donna calls them the oh my God points, because think about it. You hear something, you go, oh my God. We reflexively do some of these moves, right? So then we can move into the anger or resentment or assertiveness, standing in your power points. And those are going to be kind of right at the temples. Okay, is the easiest way to think about it, because there's a triple warmer point there, but there's also the gallbladder meridian starts right there. And so if a person's grief looks like this, okay, and then anger is pretty easy. You just cup your hands over the forehead. I mean, I've played with these holds just to make it easy for people, and so that your palm is over the temple as well.
Okay.
And then for worry, it's super simple. You just move your hands like that, so that because this is a point on the stomach meridian, and stomach and spleen, of course, there's input with stomach. Again, if there's excess, if it's out of balance, then we can tend to have more worry. And I know that's affecting people too. The real take home that I want people to understand is, somebody was saying how they got, I'm using this as an example. They got acupuncture for something, and it was like, oh my God, it was wonderful. I felt so much better. But then the next day, the issue came back. Well, yeah, because here's an important thing to think about. Energy. This is one of the things I tell my clients. Energy gets into bad habits, just like we do. Okay. And some of it is because of our behavior patterns and thought patterns and so on. Some of it is not. Some of it, in fairness to all of us, it's environmental. Okay. That could be a whole other discussion topic. But it's about training the energies to get into a better default mode. And I love, one of the homework things that I give people, because yes, I do a variety of modalities in my practice, but the bulk of what I do is Donna's work. And the reason I like it so much is because it's something people can do for themselves.
I love that. Gail, as a kind of aside, I have a book coming out on Tuesday, my first book, called Healing Ourselves, Biofield Science and the Future of Health. And I have had some, friends say, oh, why did you pick the title Healing Ourselves? That makes me feel so lonely. Like healing is something I have to do for myself. And, and I explained to her, well, it's not quite that, but every single healing practitioner I've talked to has said, well, you're the healer. That, I'm not the healer. Don't call me a healer. Some people don't even want to be called healers, right? They're just like, I'm facilitating this healing process. You are your healer. And
thank you for that.
Yeah. And I really appreciate what you're saying, because ultimately, if we take responsibility for where our energy flows, and as they say, where the mind goes, energy flows, right? So if we take responsibility for that, and it's not a heavy thing, it's a beautiful thing, right? And we have all these practices like the ones you showed us that bring us back to our essential nature, so we can do that. Then we can really carry our healing vibration out to the world and facilitate healing for others.
Exactly.
So I really appreciate this conversation and the practices you're sharing, because I think one of our goals is to help people understand that the biofield isn't just one particular type of energy practice. It's actually embedded in yoga, Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, native medicine, all of these traditions that understood the power of our energy system, what we Westerners like to now call the biofield, right?
Right. Yeah, because we know Ayurveda and Chinese medicine have been around for a very long time because they work. And the indigenous practices are still carried on because they work. And because these earlier peoples I think they were able to work closer to the earth without a lot of different distractions. And they knew innately they could blend a spiritual awareness along with what they were experiencing. And then they would find that if they did this, then this happened. And so, we are starting to get a really good understanding of, how these things work. I think it was Bruce Lipton that said, miracles are just something we haven't been able to explain by science yet.
That's right.
And I wanted to say something. You made a really good point, and this is something I'm very clear with my clientele about. People keep, they'll refer to me as a healer. I said, no, I am not a healer. I've never healed anybody. You are the healer. I'm a facilitator. I'm good with that. But
Mhm.
I didn't heal you. You did. Because healing, as you know, I mean, we know the innate ability to heal lies within each of us. And the folks that are willing to do the work to get there, evolve and pay attention where their thoughts are going and do the energy practices that work for them, you're going to get results because the energy starts to get into a better habit. Anytime we've ever taken on a new habit, let's just say that we decide, well, we're going to start walking a mile every day. You start out and you're like, I like to walk, but let's just say that if you didn't, it's like, okay, get your shoes on, get out the door, and you're like, this is a long way. And then pretty soon, after you've been doing it for a few days, you're realizing it's like, yeah, this is easier now. And wow, I think I can go further. And I actually feel better overall, sleeping better, better cognition, that kind of thing. But it didn't happen overnight. So in the same ways that we do any of the energy practices, and there are a lot of them, Donna's is not the only one. I happen to like it because she has stuff laid out easily for people, but Tai Chi and yoga and Qigong, these are all energy healing modalities, all of them. So it's what works for a particular person. But I think the important thing that I can't stress enough that I would like to see where all of these practices could be blended with conventional healthcare and people be given a choice. Just say, because when they are able to own their healing path rather than being told what to do, because we have a little bit too much of that, of being told, you have to do this, you have to, well, wait a minute, we're supposed to be a partnership here. And that is what I'd really like to see, because the promise of this, there's a great little technique that I'll share with people, and you're going to have to visualize some of this, but for pain, for example, one of the things that I was interested in when I did my dissertation was the effect of using an energy modality on pain, because pain is a huge problem in this country. We have an opiate crisis and all that kind of stuff. So, and the thing is, pain's real. So, we don't want to, we need to have something that works effectively. So what I did was I had a small pilot study of people who had low back pain. Mm-hmm. They had to meet criteria, and I taught them how to do the daily energy routine that Donna has, but I also taught them a variation of something that she calls zone tapping. And I'm just going to explain to people what it is, okay? Because we teach it where there are certain zones that are numbered, and depending on where your pain is, for example, how you say, okay, well, I have pain in my left wrist. Okay. So if the pain is above the waist and on the front of the body, you're going to tap around the wrist. Mm-hmm. We do it about 10 times, and then you wait about 10 seconds. And then you can tap it for about 30 seconds.
Okay. And this is if the pain is around the wrist. So basically, you're going to tap around the part where you have pain. Yeah.
No, not exactly. This is why I'm explaining. I mentioned the zones, but I found that was going to be too crazy and introduce a whole bunch of variables, those things. Yeah. And I was like, we need to make this as simple as possible for people. So if your pain is on the front of the body someplace, it could be, because I didn't make that clear with wrist. Let's just say it's right here. Let's just say you hurt right here. Okay. It's the front of the body. You go above the waist. Anything a front of the body above the waist, we tap on the inside part of the wrist. Okay. If it's on the back of the body, above the waist, but somewhere on the back of the body, you're going to tap the outside of the wrist. And again, I've taken some liberty with this because we're a little bit more specific, but this makes it easier for people. Okay. I'm hoping this is clear so far. Same thing goes for the bottom, the second bottom half of the body. if your pain is on the front of the body and below the waist, you're going to tap the inside of the ankle.
Oh, okay, great. Inside of
Okay.
me.
Inside of the ankle. So same kind of thing. Front of the body, inside of the wrist if it's above the waist, inside of the ankle if it's below the waist, back of the body and below the waist, you're going to tap the outside of the ankle.
I'm having fun right now, just tapping these spots,
Well,
because why not?
I used this for low back pain, and that was what people had to do every day. We did a 30-day study. They had to do this tapping. Every single one of them got relief. Some were marked, it was marked relief. And so my point here for everybody watching is that, you know, that can be an effective tool. And if you don't notice it right away, keep doing it. Because again, you're trying to get the energy to evolve to a point where it's like you start noticing, you know, I've been doing this for a few days now, and it's not as bad as it was.
Wow.
So
amazing.
And I mean, think about it. Think about the cost savings, because one of my things in healthcare is how much money we, you know, I mean, we spend so much money here in this country, and we have some of the poorest outcomes. So I think the potential anywhere in the world is, again, we're empowering people. We're giving them some tools they can do for themselves that don't necessarily involve having to use a medication. Sometimes you're going to have to, you know, sometimes you have to use medicine. There's no question.
Yes.
But this gives some people some other options.
This is amazing. And I love that you did this study. I just want to name, and yes, we will get to your questions. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. I know there are a few questions just popping in the Q&A. And if you have a burning question for Gail, now is definitely the time to put it in the Q&A. I will try to answer as many as, or Gail will try to answer as many as she can, and I will try to get to as many as we can. Just a note for those of you, you know, we wanted to have a deeper, wider conversation about the scope of this, but you can hear from Gail's experience and the practices she's sharing with us. First of all, in your experience, Gail, how many people you've helped just by doing this and integrating it in. And I know you share a deeper yearning to have this be accessible to everyone. And I know that Donna and David feel the same. I do want to share with y'all, if you're new to us here at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, we do have resources for you. So I'm going to put here in the chat right now, if you go to reportonhealing.com, about a year or so ago, we did a deep dive with over 60 stakeholders in the field, outlining how much research has been done. There are over 6,000 studies in biofield science. There are hundreds, literally, I think over 400 clinical trials in biofield healing. I just saw today from my colleagues at ACEP that they've their latest update is that there are at least 70 clinical studies. It might be RCTs. I have to remember, in energy psychology practices. So there is evidence. That evidence is mounting, and groups like ours, Consciousness and Healing Initiative, and others are doing as much as we can to help share the evidence base behind these therapies. And of course, the book that I'm just releasing goes into that in a lot of detail, and also kind of fun stories about some of our fellow scientists, myself, but others as well. And like our journey, you know, of kind of how we've been putting this out. So when you start digging into the science, it's amazing. There really is science behind this, and it does need to be shared more broadly and widely with the community. So if you go to that reportonhealing.com, there are lots of resources there. There is like an 84-page report. I know most of you don't have time to read that. There is a 12-page summary. Share these with your community. If you're fellow nurses, medical practitioners who want to share this out to let people know, if they don't know about this area called the biofield and energy medicine and they're kind of skeptical about it, that report is meant to help fill that gap. So I just wanted to mention that. And we only have a few minutes for questions, but some really, really beautiful ones. So one of the questions comes from Donna, not Donna Eden, but a different Donna. And she asks a wonderful question, which is, how do you integrate your belief in God and energy medicine, considering so many people in organized religion are afraid of energy medicine?
That's a great question. For me, while I don't have a specific religious practice, I have a spiritual practice. So for me, I know that whenever I hope this is going to answer for them. That when I'm doing energy work with somebody, I understand that it's sacred. It's very sacred work, and that I'm actually working with a powerful, subtle energy and an intelligence that is there to help. I'm there to help facilitate, the goals that we're trying to reach for that particular person. So and this, I know this question has come up, and it's really a good one. And I don't even know that I'm going to have the time to dive as deeply into it as it deserves. But I believe if a person is able to, I think you can bring your religious practice into this with absolutely no problem. So I don't know if that was exactly what if that helps or not, but I think it can be done.
Yeah, thank you, Gail, for that. Nearly every tradition across the world, different spiritual traditions, have this understanding of what we call the biofield or the energy system. And if I could speak to that a little bit, Gail, what I've recognized in talking to all of these different spiritual tradition leaders, spiritual leaders and energy healers, is that they describe healing as kind of coming back to our essential selves, our higher self, our spirit, our soul, our consciousness, God. We all have different ways of describing that. Some of us describe it as oneness or simply nature. So if we understand that these practices are essentially leading us back to the core of our spiritual nature, however we describe that, right? I describe it sometimes as a bridge. It's the bridge that links consciousness with healing, the vast aspects of consciousness, who we are, right? So,
I like that.
So I think if we cannot be afraid to bring God into the picture and help people understand that, yes, this is spiritual work. I mean, I haven't really met many practitioners who don't say the spirit has nothing to do with it.
No, it has everything to do with it.
Not a transactional process that's going on here.
And hi, Sherry, I saw your comment right there. I think Sherry made a good point just in the chat box that God wants us to heal, and whatever, because there are different faiths. So however you refer to God or a higher power, that power wants us to heal. And that's why we've been giving these tools.
Beautiful. Right, there are
Thank you, Sherry, for that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Sherry. That's beautiful. A couple of technical questions around the pain. Do you tap on the same side? And then the other question around that, how often and long would you do these kinds of tapping practices?
Sure. Usually we start with tapping for about 10 seconds. So let's just say you've got pain in your shoulder, in the front of the body. So we'll use this front of the wrist inside. I'm going to tap about 10 times back and forth. And you don't have to be exact. It's roughly 10 times. You wait about 10 seconds. And then you're going to tap about 30 times. Okay. And give it a few minutes. Like you may wait 5 minutes or so. And if you didn't notice a whole lot of change, go to the other side of the body. Now, it may sound a little counterintuitive, but it does work. Okay. So that's how we do that. Great.
Similar kind of question, kind of related to what you just said. If you don't notice it this way, try it a different way. We have an attendee who says, I believe in and I've benefited from acupuncture and even acupressure, but I haven't really gotten to work with EFT very well, although I've tried with different people who teach it. So just any insight about what might get in the way if one is trying to practice EFT and not initially seeing the results maybe that they've seen with other things. Any advice on that?
Well, while I use some EFT, I don't consider myself a practitioner. I'm certainly not David Feinstein or Dawson Church or these guys who are, the experts. But I think that it's important for us to be aware of our own beliefs around whether something can help us. That's the first part. And I hope the person, who asked this, because sometimes we have some unconscious stuff around it, and that can be a little harder to access, as we know. But the other thing that I have noticed with people is that some of us may get results quickly and others not so much, meaning it may take time. EFT is it is a way of accessing the body that is a little bit different because it is using tapping, and tapping does work. We know the cells have receptors for light, vibration, and sound, and all of that, but it's also creating something called piezoelectricity, which means every time we touch the body, that generates an electrical impulse. Okay, so it's a different way of trying to work with a particular problem, but it has some similarities because acupuncture, they're putting a needle in a very tiny spot, a little stainless steel needle, and the activity of the stainless steel and the fluid, the saline, basically, lymph and whatever that is touching, can also have an effect, from an electromagnetic standpoint. Mm-hmm. So what I have found personally with using EFT, this may help, around a particular issue, is depending on the issue and how stubborn and pervasive it was, there have been a couple that really were stubborn for me. And I'm saying it took several months of doing it before I started to notice that I was getting results where I wasn't really getting as triggered by whatever. So that would be the one thing, is to have patience that remember that some of these habits are, and here's another thing, this may help you. The triple warmer meridian that I mentioned, he's actually a whole energy system, but he's a keeper of habits, and he hangs on to habits, and he doesn't like change. And for some of us, some things that I've run into, and this is in conventional healthcare, and also because I'm doing pretty much 100% energy set healing now because I'm having too much fun. I mean, it's fun. But sometimes people, it can be related to, who would they be if the issue became resolved? Mm-hmm. And that's a tough one. That's a real tough one. But I used it with myself a little bit around the particular issue that I had, because I was like, well, what would that mean? And then I began to kind of think about it and say, well, it would mean that this is, I might be stepping into this realm, or maybe I'm going to set better boundaries about something. Mm-hmm. It takes some introspection and reflection for sure to do that. But I believe all of these modalities have benefit, and we have to play with them and find what works.
I love this. So I'm hearing patience. I'd suggest also, what's worked for me, presence. So actually, being present with something and not having our mind somewhere else while we're tapping, right. Really coming into the body and being with it. Playfulness, I heard that as well. So, all of these different ways that we can explore, and just holding time and space and knowing that the right thing is going to happen at the right time. And I love what you just said. Who would I be, or what would be different in my life if mm-hmm. I didn't have this issue? And so just mm-hmm. de-identifying with the issue itself.
Right.
Gail, thank you. This has been such a treasure. I'm so grateful that you've chosen to spend the hour with us. It's been so enlightening. And thank you so much also for your beautiful heart and sharing all of these practices with us. I Absolutely. So appreciate it. And I'm sure that we'll have other opportunities for conversations in the future. Sure. I do believe that Jason has been putting some links to your work in the chat, but just in case anyone is listening and not watching the chat, where can people connect with you to learn more?
Probably they can go to my website. You can go to my email. That's probably the fastest. And that's just Gail Jett, Gail Jett 53 at gmail.com.
Wow, great.
And my website is www.advancedhealingenergetics.com. So it's one word, Advanced Healing Energetics. Sure. And I've got information on my website, and you can go take a look at it and see if it's something that might work for you.
That's great. Oh, and thank you, Jason. Jason's just put all of this copy into the links. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I really want to thank our Chi contributors. Those of you who feel called, we are a nonprofit. We are a social profit. We do things for the benefit of humanity and for all of us together as a human family. If you choose to join us as a contributor for a mere $9 a month, which is less than 2 Starbucks, and you get a lot more nutrition out of it, and you'll be able to access this wisdom from Gail and all of our wonderful presenters in perpetuity. And you also get other free perks as well. That's $108 a year, intentional number, of course. And, for those of you who are just joining us, tapping in to this beautiful stream of wisdom, thank you so much. And thank you, Gail. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shamini. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful